Hey, it's time for the Georgia show. We're going to talk about the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Bunch of banged up dogs, but you know Georgia has other dogs ready to step up. We'll tell you who. Plus, we're going to talk about Hugh Freeze. Man, had some strange quotes this week that we cannot let go unchecked. And, it used to be a pretty common theme that Auburn had recruits that Georgia wanted. Georgia had players that Auburn wishes it could have had. But that doesn't really happen so much anymore, at least not for Georgia's case. We'll break it all down right now on the Georgia Show.
Better never rest.
Counting careless in the sky. What a thrilling time to be alive.
Got Pete Toms in here tonight. Palmer, we will get to all that dog stuff in just a moment. Let's breeze through some prize picks really quick. We do this every Wednesday. And y'all, we're with you. We know there's not enough Georgia picks, so we're not going to waste a ton of time doing this, but we are obligated to do so. So let's go ahead and make our picks here, Palmer. Some overs, some unders on what we expect for college football this week. We're doing okay. We're not doing the best. I'll just be transparent about that. Let's start off with let's go with rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. Rushing touchdowns is going to be big in any game, specifically Georgia and Auburn. But as you look around with LSU taking on Ole Miss this week, and yeah, I don't think we want to touch Cincinnati BYU. Quinshon Judkins, would you rather go with him or Jaden Daniels? Pretty tantalizing rushing quarterback option there in this LSU Ole Miss game.
So I just pulled up Quinshon Judkins for the season. Did not have a touchdown last week. Had one in each of the three previous games. I think he's a little bit banged up, but I mean, he's at 75% on the season, 4 touchdowns, 4 games. Let's keep that going. I'll say Judkins gets a score.
Okay, I like it. That's locked in. Okay, what do we also do here? We go receiving.
Yeah. So
yards?
I've got one that I've got my eye on because this kid impressed me last year.
For yards?
For yards. For receiving yards in another SEC game, Kentucky, Florida. Georgia's going to see both those teams here before too long. Berrien Brown, wide receiver for Kentucky.
He's going over.
Over. He is a stud. No doubt. At one point, I think he was an on-3 5-star. Was a true freshman last year, all SEC freshman player. Had a big game against Georgia. He's from Nashville, Tennessee, so that's also how I know him. But
yeah, he's a stud.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go. We want to go passing yards or passing touchdowns?
Let's go with touchdowns. I feel like that's
Caleb Williams against Colorado.
Hammer it.
Hammering that.
Over.
All right. More. And then let's go with our bust of the week. Interceptions. Is Graham Mertz going to throw at least one interception against Kentucky?
I think we get a little Friday night action in here with Jack Plummer, Louisville, and NC State. Let's say he throws one.
All right, cool. So we're going to go $20, what we do every week, and we'll place that entry right now and see how we do. All right, guys, we are going to work with prize picks and try to get more dogs in here to make this a more interesting segment for everybody involved, not just us. Palmer, when we look at the Deep South's oldest rivalry, my man, you're getting ready to go to Jordan-Hare yourself, a couple days. It's an exciting place to be. For Georgia, though, Georgia fans, I think there's a little bit of trepidation here because there are so many banged up dogs. You had a piece on DawgsHQ.com about the dogs that are ready to step up, specifically on the defense. Which name are you specifically looking at that needs to have a big game for Georgia, not just to win comfortably, but to stay a threat in this game?
Yeah, I'll say Jamon Dumas Johnson. Maybe not necessarily somebody that's stepping up, for a banged up Bulldog, but somebody that
he needs
we
to step
spoke
up
with.
for his own reasons, right?
Exactly. I mean, we spoke with him, and by his own admission, he's been average to start the season. That is not an average football player, guys, and he's not playing great. He's man enough to admit that, and I think that's going to turn around here before too long. So I think that, for Georgia, especially with the run game that Auburn wants to bring, those two quarterbacks that they've got between Peyton Thorne and Robbie Ashford, maybe not the best pairing. I mean, the fact that we're talking about two quarterbacks, if you've got two quarterbacks, do you have one? They've got a really good running back. In fact, they have two, maybe even three really good running backs. One of those guys is banged up this week, but Jarquez Hunter is healthy, and he's somebody that has, potential to have a big game. The way that you can slow down this Auburn offense, and if they're not slowing themselves down, is to keep that run game bottled up and force those quarterbacks to make plays. Jamon Dumas-Johnson is somebody that is a great run defender. He's said, hey, I don't feel like I've been the best against the pass and getting out to the edge. Let him, he's got to have a big game. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about it. I'm putting him on my players to watch tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right, and we haven't beaten up on the guy, but we all know, and he knows too, that he's not playing up to the standard of, not only his own play, but the standard that is set for Georgia defenses. And that's not even, calling out individual guys. That's just what Kirby Smart and Schumann and Will Muschamp expect out of that middle linebacker position. You got to be the quarterback on the field. And for people to be critical of Carson Beck, if you're going to be critical about somebody on defense, your eye should be pointed to that middle linebacker position if things aren't up to snuff. So I'm with you, man. We've seen him deliver. Now, what I go back to is the fact that in the preseason, we had that story that Kirby had to bring him into his office and show him, hey, man, you are not playing up to the standard.
Smile London too. I mean,
Smile
it's
too.
not
Yes.
there.
Yeah. So yeah. I'm not saying that he's still not. I'm not saying that he's loafing by any means. I just think, it's human nature, guys. You've won back-to-back national championships, and sometimes you need a little bit of a wake-up call. You need a little bit of a kick in the rear, and that's going to happen. That happens to everybody in their jobs from time to time, and certainly on the football field. So I think if Jamon Dumas-Johnson does pick up his play at Auburn, that is going to be huge for Georgia, and it's going to be something that will be very well received. I did also, checking out your piece about the next man up. We don't really know much about Javon Bullard. I think we presume that he'll be ready to go. I liked what I saw from Dan Jackson, though, against UAB. He was flying around, and he was ready to play. Dirty Dan was not slowing down. He was the quintessential all gas, no brakes player against UAB.
Well,
competition steps up as Georgia's season goes along, of course, but I thought that was pretty encouraging to see from Georgia's secondary.
Absolutely. And it's encouraging to see from Dan, because that's somebody that, even going back to 2021, he was a contributor in that secondary. And whether Javon Bullard is out there or not, Dan Jackson is going to be getting snaps. He's going to get more if Javon Bullard is not available, but he's going to get snaps regardless. And to have the kind of injury that he had at the position that he plays, a foot injury last year, Kirby said, hey, I think he's just getting back up to speed. And that's what Dan Jackson is known for. He's known as a fast guy, physical guy, somebody that is, ready to roll. And so, I think that Dan Jackson, like him or not, he's going to be out there, guys.
Oh, we love him.
It's good. It's a good thing that he is getting back to the full speed that he was, prior to the injury.
From the chicken capital of the world. What's up, Jake Roos? How are things up atop the mountain this evening?
Little rainy up here, but we're making do. And I want to point out, you guys were just talking about Dan Jackson, number 3 in the safeties and stars when it comes to snaps taken this season thus far. Only bested by Tyke Smith and Malachi Starks. So
he's been pretty outstanding.
even when Bullard was healthy, he was still getting run. So don't let people don't let your biases confuse you. Dan Jackson's beating out really good players to get playing time.
Yeah, you got that piece up at DawgsHQ right now, right? Full breakdown, Roos, on ounce and what?
My bad. That was me. I automatically muted. I accidentally muted you when I made.
Yeah, I was like, "What happened? Did I mute myself with my mind? What just happened?" Yeah, but that's cool. Check out DawgsHQ.com right now for Jake Roos's breakdown on what the Dogs have done from a participation standpoint. Some fascinating stuff there, and some context needed, of course, with the injuries Georgia's had. But as we continue to say, as long as this doesn't become a trend for Georgia, hopefully someone can stick a thumb in the dam right now. That's a lot of Dogs getting reps early on in the year.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I was kind of struck with that, especially on the defensive front and at outside linebacker. To me, that was probably the most interesting position of them all, because outside of Chaz Chambliss, man, it's almost neck and neck in terms of who's getting opportunities at that position. So, you've got Marvin Jones Jr., who's just slightly ahead of Damon Wilson, Darius Smith tied with Damon Wilson, CJ Madden following them closely, and Samuel Mpemba in the mix there too. Feels like they're kind of just waiting for somebody to break through there, man, other than Chaz. I mean, Chaz has gotten the majority of the snaps by a good margin, 50 more snaps than the next closest guy. But at the same time, it looks like they're looking for the number 2 guy there, and the competition based on the snaps feels like it's pretty wide open at this point.
Any Georgia players for you, Jake, as you joined us a moment after we started this topic here? Who are you looking at for Georgia that may be called upon, not a traditional starter, would not be starting if not for injury, but the Dogs need them, whether it's on offense or defense, to keep things comfortable against the Tigers on Saturday?
I think that you're really going to need Dylan Fairchild to play very well. And I think he has. And I feel like that offensive line really, to some degree, is maybe playing a little bit better now that he's in the rotation. It's hard to, judge that fully. But I think Fairchild's impact has been pretty noticeable. Now, I will cage that by saying how much of that is Dylan Fairchild and how much of that is just Daijun Edwards being a slippery guy. I mean, he's done a great job with that. So, I think that Fairchild on that side of the ball, defensively, it's kind of tougher because you're not as banged up as the offensive side, I don't feel. Obviously Dan's big. David Daniels probably going to get some run on Saturday too. So I would kind of circle those guys as guys that need to step up and just continue really doing what they've been doing, which is, I think, playing pretty well at this point.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen these games go on and we've seen guys have to step up that are still feeling their way out, I understand why fans are a little bit frustrated, because you're seeing a team that is truly a work in progress, and you have not had any rhythm this year, offensively or defensively. And I think a lot of those injuries have a lot to do with that. But then you look at the scores and you're still dominating. And I think Georgia still has a good chance to dominate at Auburn, even with the platoon that it brings up there now. It is encouraging that you may be bringing Lawson Lucky up there. You may be getting Ladd McConkey back. We don't fully know about that yet, but those are 2 big additions. And then we haven't spoken much about Mykel Williams either, and he had a short-lived absence, we presume, against UAB. Getting him back, you're getting a little bit of consistency there on defense and on offense if Ladd is able to go. We don't really expect Lawson to get meaningful snaps, but at least you got some depth there tied in. For a while, it was just Brock and Oscar.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mykel, and he was another guy that kind of caught my eye in the snap count. Really, his position group. You're talking about that defensive front. It is tight, man, between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like 8 guys are pretty tight in that race. They've had 12 guys featured on defensive line this year. And, the top 8 guys are separated by 30 snaps. But, the first 3 are 19 snap difference between them. And then you kind of get into the meat of the order, Nazir Stackhouse and Mykel Williams, 79 snaps. Jordan Hall right there was 76 himself. So that was quite interesting for me to see. Again, it feels like they're rotating a lot of guys through at that position as well. And I think that that's probably to Georgia's benefit down the line as they continue to move forward, because they're building depth with this defensive front and keeping those guys fresh.
And I mean, they're getting experience with those guys, because you've got, right, like you said, a guy like Jordan Hall. They've only got 10 true defensive linemen. If you throw Gabe Harris in there, was recruited as an outside linebacker edge, you like to call it a slash, Roos. He's working with the defensive linemen now. Even with him, you've only got 11 guys. With Tyrion Ingram Dawkins out right now, that number gets bumped down to 10 again. I mean, this is not the deepest group in terms of numbers, and so getting some of those younger guys reps is important, because you know what you've got in Warren Brinson, you know what you've got in Zion Logue and Nazir Stackhouse and Michael Williams and Tramel Wildflower. Those five, I think you feel very comfortable with. Christian Miller has gotten a lot of snaps, but he hadn't gotten that before this year. Like you said, Jordan Hall is a true freshman, so he hadn't obviously gotten a lot of snaps before this year. That has been big for that defensive line to get some of those guys, reps, just so that if you do have an injury, if you do miss somebody for a game or two, or, for however long, you're not throwing somebody that has never seen the field out onto the field.
Yeah. And I mean, Jamal Jarrett's another guy. He's averaging about 10 snaps a game right now. So, I thought that was interesting to see, certainly, but I agree. They've really done a nice job of kind of fleshing that room out and giving them an opportunity to, like I said, build depth there with the way that they've rotated that position.
I want to pat ourselves on the back, because I think when we were leading up to the season this summer, we spoke a lot about guys that would make an immediate impact. And I think we all at one point or another were pretty bullish on Hall, and he's proven to be the real deal as a young pup there. Let's shift our focus to the head coach of the Auburn Tigers just momentarily. Hugh Freeze has been a pretty quotable fella this week for some of the strangest reasons and some of the wrong reasons. I'll start off, guys, with him. It was a little bit of a blunder, but he didn't know that Georgia made it to the national championship in Kirby Smart's second season. I know that was a pretty rocky time for him there, the 2017 season specifically.
He was kind of tied up, man. He had some stuff going on.
He had a lot going on. But I almost wonder if this is bad news for Georgia, that Hugh Freeze is so locked in on his Auburn Tigers that he had no idea what Kirby Smart had built in such a short period of time. He just took that Ole Miss beatdown and assumed that Kirby walked off with his tail between his legs, I guess.
Yeah, I was kind of taken aback by that. But like you said, he was kind of occupied during that course of time. And listen, Hugh Freeze has bigger things to worry about than, what Georgia did in 2017. He came in to what was essentially probably the barest cupboard that Auburn's had in a long, long time.
No, probably about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's they're down bad, to steal a phrase from the kids. So he's got his work cut out for him, and I understand why he would be so locked in on his team and what they've got to do. I think he's probably the right guy for the job. He can probably get this thing turned around for them, but make no mistake, it's a pretty colossal fix that this guy's had to put in. So, I understand if he's trying to maybe even quell some of those expectations of what Kirby did comparatively, because the climb's a lot steeper for Hugh Freeze.
Well, Roos, somebody pitched a theory to me today that his ignorance on Kirby and Georgia making it to the national championship in the second season may have been not all too, accidental. It may have been, on purpose to try to, like you said,
that's what I'm thinking.
Expectations down. That may have been a, hey, don't expect us at Auburn to be making the national championship in year 2. This is a build. And I think, that's what he was trying to say, that, and look, to his point, Kirby didn't win a national championship in year 2. And Obviously to make it there is impressive. And Auburn folks certainly remember the fact that they made it there, considering they went through them in the SEC championship game. But, I think that to his, credit here, he may have been just trying to pump the brakes on the expectations and say, look, this is a process. This is a build. Like you said, that may have been, it probably is the most bare cupboard, in the SEC, certainly in a long time, in terms of a takeover of a program like Auburn. And they're probably not playing for a national championship in year 2.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's accurate, is what he said, and that's the laugher there. The other one that he said that wasn't really that funny, that was just kind of like, I'm not one to continue to beat up on Hugh Freeze just because it's such an easy target, but he did say that he didn't fully understand the hatred of the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. He says that he doesn't sense that it has the hatred that is in some other rivalries that he's been a part of. Nonetheless, it's intense. I'm not big on hate. I'm really not. I'm big on this means something to so many people that we should compete in a way out of love for our people, not necessarily for hate for other people. That's how I operate, but I hope we compete because we love Auburn, and it means something to the Auburn people to compete against Georgia. That'll be my approach. Nonetheless, love is a great motivator for me. Now,
Hippie Hugh.
There was a point in the Georgia-Auburn rivalry where I wouldn't call it love, but it wasn't as much hate as there is right now. And Roos and I, Roos, were you at the Cam Newton-Nick Fairley game?
I was not. I didn't go to the game. I was in Auburn, and I was hanging out at a buddy's house.
Okay.
I didn't make it to the game. We tailgated all day, but do I remember it very, very, very well.
I was there, and I was taking photos for the red and black, and I remember snapping quite a few photos of the blood on Aaron Murray's jersey. I did get a pretty cool picture of Cam Newton with like a perfect Heisman stiff arm, and I thought that was cool because I think everyone knew that he was going to get it. But there's like so much distraction around that game. Didn't know if he was allowed to play, if he was supposed to play, and he did. And I think that was the night where it changed, where I felt like it changed. Like growing up, I felt like it was kind of like a cousin that you every once in a while would run into. There was the connection between Pat Dye and Vince Dooley, but it's definitely changed over the last decade plus. If I had to list the things that Georgia loves about Auburn, just to put it in perspective for Hugh Freeze, Georgia definitely loves that Auburn moved the game to September because they didn't want to play Georgia and Alabama back-to-back. They love the fact that Auburn got back-to-back home games in 2012 and 2013. They love Nick Fairley. They really love that Auburn brought Nick Fairley out on the field before the 2017 game to fire up the crowd and just loosen everybody up. There's a lot of love from Georgia fans for Auburn, to put it in Hugh Freeze's terminology. It's a lot of love out there, guys.
But it's probably not quite the love that Ole Miss and Mississippi State have for each other, and that's the rivalry he's been a part of.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't know that one. I'm not familiar with that one. Like I know the Egg Bowl, and I see, I saw the dog piss in the end zone thing, and like that was just funny to me, but I don't understand like the flavor of that rivalry like I understand Auburn and Alabama.
And to me, I think it's, and listening to what Kirby had to say about it, in the love, hate, respect in this rivalry, that's what makes Georgia Auburn different than those two specifically. Auburn, Alabama, that Hugh will be a part of, that Kirby has been a part of, and then Ole Miss, Mississippi State, that Hugh was a part of. Those are in-state rivalries. They live those 365 days a year. I think if you're talking to people in West Georgia, they live this one, but I don't know that the average Athenian lives Georgia Auburn, and I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. I didn't grow up in the state of Georgia. I know that there's a lot of Metro Atlanta people that attend Auburn, and so that there's a Tiger contingent in Atlanta just as much as there is a Georgia contingent. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel this is one that's lived out 365 days a year. It's one that's rooted in deep history because it's the Deep South's oldest rivalry.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's one that's lived out every day of every year.
I don't think it's been lived out, but I'll say, like, you used to know Georgia Auburn week was different. It used to have a certain feeling to it. And I don't know if it's because it's changed, it's earlier in the fall, or if because Auburn down,
hasn't been good.
or not necessarily even down, but like down in this rivalry, this series. Georgia's just beating them down. You can name the last 3 quarterbacks to beat Georgia from Auburn, and they it's since 2010. It's Cam, Nick Marshall, and Jarrett Stidham. I mean, that's crazy. So it just doesn't have the same feeling as a lot of rivalries do, and certainly what it used to have.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, to me, the big change has been the shift in the rivalry, which is Georgia's won 15 out of the last 20. I mean, it's, you go back to 03, Auburn's won 5 times since then. That will shift the narrative of a rivalry. It won't make it feel as intense. I mean, that is it a rivalry when you're not trading blows anymore? And that's really, I think, where a lot of people come at it from. I mean, if you're a kid in high school, a recruit, all you know is that Georgia has won this rivalry pretty convincingly in your lifetime. It's like not even close. So, I get it from that perspective. I think that there is still a lot of hate around it. But that really changes things. I think it changes perspectives. It changes, the young fans' minds, who they perceive. A lot of kids probably remember, Jake Fromm losing to South Carolina at home a lot more than they remember, some of the Auburn losses in their lifetime. So
the average high schooler, do y'all think the average high schooler sees Georgia Auburn as a bigger rivalry or Georgia Tennessee?
Man,
I mean,
it's hard to say, man.
I'm biased because of where I grew up. I grew up on the Georgia
I am too.
Yeah, I grew up on the Georgia Tennessee line, so there's a lot of hate there. But I feel like a lot of people probably over the last 15 to 20 years have probably developed an equal, I would say, disdain for Tennessee, if not more so than Auburn.
And more so. There's certainly more disdain for Alabama than there is Auburn. And that's not even a game that's played, frequently.
Yeah.
That had, I was discussing this with some people today, and I described, obviously Georgia Auburn is a traditional rivalry. Georgia, Florida, traditional rivalry. Tech, traditional. There's also circumstantial rivalries, and Tennessee can probably be thrown into that because, those aren't teams that have played all, they don't have the deepest history, but they've played each other every year since being in the same division, and they've gone back and forth a couple of times. But Alabama is the most circumstantial rivalry of them all.
Sure.
And that's because Georgia has Kirby, Alabama had Kirby, and the way that it's played out in the 5 meetings since 2017, that creates a rivalry.
Yeah, you're battling for top position, right? I mean, this is 2 men wrestling over the world heavyweight championship.
And you're also battling for recruits. I mean,
sure.
I think that's, and Bruce, you would know this. That's something that factors into the feelings of the fans in a rivalry is, well, dang, we really wanted that kid, and he went to this school or that school. Auburn hasn't beaten Georgia. I mean, as we said, they haven't beaten Georgia on the field that much. They certainly haven't beaten them in recruiting all that often either.
Well, let's roll into that because that's what I wanted to talk to Roos about. And Palmer, you brought it up. So, it used to be a theme, man. You talk about like Derek Brown. There used to be players that Georgia objectively missed on when you looked up and down Auburn's roster. A lot of guys from the state of Georgia. Is there anyone on Auburn's roster that comes to mind for you that Georgia, I won't say wishes they had, but lost out on to Auburn specifically in a recruiting battle?
Yeah. So I actually had pulled up Auburn's roster and was looking over this. I don't think Georgia necessarily lost the recruitment of Kayan Lee, but he was committed to Georgia at one point. He's a younger guy who's there. You go down the list.
I'm just looking,
they were kind of in on Zion Puckett. Kildrick Falk is a guy they would have liked to have had, but he's from Alabama. You knew that probably wasn't going to go their way.
Yeah.
And that's the case with several of these guys that you would say that maybe Georgia lost out on is, they're Alabama guys, which is what it is. I mean, that's next to pulling guys out of Louisiana, pulling guys out of Alabama is equally difficult. Continuing to scroll down here. I mean, Justin Rogers is there now, but it's not like Georgia fought to get him the second time he was available. He went to Kentucky out of high school. Georgia would love to have had him at that time, but now he's with them. Georgia recruited Connor Liu pretty heavily, for sure, out of Kennesaw Mountain, and I think he's a good center. They would like to have had him. Zykevius Walker is the big one that jumps out to me. Zykevius would be the guy out of Schley. And that's one of those that can continue to haunt them a little bit because he's the brother of, Jalua Solomon, who's committed to Auburn for the 2024 class. And then in 2025, you got Zayden Walker, the 5-star edge player. And Georgia likes him as an inside linebacker. That's one of those that's going to be interesting to see. Auburn is not a school that's mentioned with him very often. He doesn't talk about Auburn. It says it's Georgia and Miami right now. He's got, a brother who's there and a brother who's committed. It's going to be hard to, I think, kind of break family tradition. Now, that Georgia will work to change that, but we'll see. Zykevius is the guy, though, that really jumps off the board. Rhett Womack mentions Tank Bigsby. That was a big one. That was a big one that they lost.
Yeah, and, we heard some whispers that he was flirting with Georgia out of the transfer portal there for a little bit, and it still didn't come to fruition.
Yeah. That was a big one, and probably one of the bigger misses, I would say, in the Kirby Smart era was Tank Bigsby. You'd probably have to give that a nod. But on the current roster, it's not just a situation where Georgia's kind of had to go toe-to-toe. And like you said, man, in the 10 years I've been doing this, that's been a big shift. When I first started, that was something you heard all the time was Georgia and Auburn. Just not the case as much anymore, man. And like I said, I think that they'll get back there. I think Hugh Freeze is a very compelling recruiter and, does a great job with that aspect of it. But he's going to have to in order to be able to compete with Georgia moving forward because, if you're not landing guys that Georgia wants, you're probably not landing very good players in a lot of cases.
That was kind of the long circuitous route I wanted to get to is that's the state of this rivalry right now. If you don't have those dudes one way or another, I know Georgia's got a few that Auburn wishes they could have had and missed out on, but you're just not seeing like even in a lot of the decisions that we see, like when we talk about who's going where, we don't really talk about Auburn being a team that Georgia's got to look out for. So I don't know if Hugh Freeze wants to build his roster a little bit differently or if he does want to continue to try to go after those guys that Georgia's got. But for right now, it's kind of a weird thing. It's kind of a weird deal.
And that's a knock on Brian Harsin. I mean, that's
why they hated him, right?
Yeah. I'm not, before Auburn fans discovered this podcast and think that we're dogging out Auburn, like I said, I think Hugh Freeze is the right guy for the job, man. Brian Harsin was, by all accounts, kind of resting on his laurels.
He was in over his shoes.
Yeah. And so, I think that they're in a better place. Auburn's one of those schools to me that makes so much sense, especially going into his next year of focusing on transfers and really trying to kind of right the ship in that way. Go pull some guys. They did it. I mean, they pulled some guys in that way, but I think that makes sense for them to kind of continue to try to do in the way that like a Tennessee did.
Roos, did Georgia pursue Tyler Fromm at all?
No, not really at all.
I mean that's an obvious crossover there.
Sure. I don't even know that he had an offer, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And on the topic of Tank Bigsby, if Georgia gets Tank Bigsby, they probably don't have Daijun Edwards.
There's no question.
Would you rather have had Tank Bigsby for the last 3 years or Daijun Edwards for the last, being a contributor?
You're glad you got him now.
You're glad you have him now. But Georgia's running back room looks very different if you get Tank Bigsby instead of Daijun Edwards.
It's a lot of consonants.
I would agree. And, that was one of those that there's no question about it. Daijun was the replacement for Tank when they missed on Tank, who they missed on
Zach Evans.
Zach Evans. Yeah, they missed on Tank by going after Zach Evans.
Fellas, let's chop some wood, wrap this thing up. I'll start us off here. Mike Bobo is, he was destined to just have a lot of hatred and vinegar and all this stuff from Georgia fans. But this is a big game for him. This is a big trip back to a place where I think he felt like he probably could have done a little bit more, probably could have done a little bit better, and was maybe hamstrung a little bit. Even with Bo Nix, you saw the success that he had against Kirby, marching up and down the field early on in that matchup that they had a few years ago. I'm not saying that Mike Bobo is coming into this game and just going to use that as motivation, but I will say that this could be a game where Mike Bobo earns some respect from Georgia fans, whether they want to give it to him or not. It's a primetime game on the road. Carson Beck's got a lot on the line. Mike Bobo's got a lot on the line. Not that he really cares because the stats back up what he's doing. Jake Rowe Sunday night said that he could see Georgia getting up, getting an early lead and kind of sitting on the ball a little bit. I'm kind of hemming and hawing on that. We'll get our picks in as a staff in a couple days, but as of tonight, kind of leaning towards Georgia covering and doing so. I won't say easily, but I'll say going away. And I think if that's the case, I think y'all are probably going to be a little bit quieter about Mike Bobo because I know you're not going to give him his flowers, but you'll probably be a little bit quieter about it. So, Choppin, what about Bobo?
I would say people being quiet about Mike Bobo would be the equivalent of Mike Bobo.
Yeah, probably so.
I mean, that's as close as he's ever going to get to it.
Yep.
I'm going to chop wood about what kind of something we just talked about, and that's, this Georgia-Auburn rivalry in terms of recruiting. I really kind of hope it gets back to where it was, man. That was an exciting time. That was very cool to see. You had staffs really going at it. Gus Malzahn was fantastic at that. They've done a really nice job over the years of recruiting over there at Auburn. They know what it takes, and to me, I know it's one of those. I'm not saying college football is better when Auburn's good. That's, like people say about Florida State and Notre Dame and all that stuff. I don't buy into any of that personally. I don't think any of that stuff really matters. There are going to be good teams who rise up regardless. But I'll say that it makes for more fun in the recruiting world when both of those teams are in on a guy. And you can kind of see some of that palpable hate, and those difference maker guys. You mentioned Derek Brown earlier, man. You imagine what he could have done in Athens. I mean, he had a tremendous career in Auburn. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it would have been any better, but it would have changed Georgia's fortunes too. Maybe Mark
a lot
Rick's
quicker.
Fortune. Yeah, maybe Mark Rick's fortune. So I think that it is. It's a really interesting rivalry from that perspective, and I hope it gets back to it. I think that it's exciting. It's fun to hear kids, talk about that. You hear the Pat Dye's cabin mentions and all that coming back up. So, I'm chopping wood about Auburn. Get back up because it's fun when you're recruiting against Georgia.
Yep. No, I do agree with you there. And I am in the boat of I think college football is better when you've got those teams like Florida State and Texas and Notre Dame and USC. I'd throw Auburn in there as well because I think it makes the Iron Bowl, very meaningful.
Sure.
So
nobody wants to hear that.
I am going to chop wood about the travel roster. And something I learned today is that the travel roster has grown. It used to be 70 and now it's 74. And, I know 4 people probably doesn't make a difference to the average fan about who's there and who's not. But, it's interesting because you've got a couple less decisions to make. And I don't think it makes it any easier to leave certain guys at home. But it's always interesting because I think that you learn a lot about what these coaches really think about the depth of this team. And, do they feel comfortable bringing 3 tight ends and leaving home, a 4th because Pierce Spurlin is not healthy? Or do they feel like that they need to? And that's something that's part of their identity. And having 12, personnel out on the field and 2 tight ends, and you got to have a backup for both of them. The little storylines in there, how does this, walk on make it? Does that DB play special teams? Yada, yada, yada. That's something that is always intriguing to me. I enjoy doing the travel roster projection. Roe and I discussed that one for a while, and he put that out today. So I encourage y'all to go check that out. I'll have a story on the travel roster later this week, talk to a couple of the players about their first time making the travel roster and what that looks like. How do you learn about it? What does it mean to make that roster, to make that trip and be a younger guy and watch, maybe watch from the sidelines. And, along those lines, I think, Kirby talked about it with Carson Beck today. Kind of a second wood that I'll chop is the road atmosphere. I think Georgia's going to handle it well. I think Carson Beck is somebody, Kirby said he has experienced these. He hasn't played in them, but he's experienced them. And so, this is a guy that has been around the league. He's been to Auburn. He knows what it's like to be at Jordan-Hare Stadium. And so he's not going to be, a prisoner of the moment. So excited to see this matchup. I think it's a lot more intriguing when you've got, a home dog in the Tigers going up against the Dogs.
Well, Palmer, you've made the travel roster. Congratulations.
Yes.
Get out of there in one piece. Go Braves. Jake Roos, like that ball cap.
Yeah. Brett Womack was asking what the hat was. So,
and I appreciate Brett Womack and everybody that was in the comments tonight and every night. Hope you'll have a safe trip to Auburn. If you're going, be careful. Don't bark in too many children's faces. Just make sure you have people around you. Have a good support system. And get out of there in one piece. Should be a fun afternoon and evening on the plains. Thank y'all once again. We will see you Saturday night after the game to break it all down, and back here Sunday at 8:30 for the Sunday edition of the Georgia Show, and Bark After Dark every Monday at 9 p.m. Jake Roos, do y'all have a beat on what y'all have going on, or still got that one cooking?
We just move as the spirit leads, Wes.
Okay. Now that's how that show needs to be. But appreciate it. Y'all hit like and subscribe. Join us at DawgsHQ.com. $1 for 1 month to give us a trial run, and 50% off this week for our big game special honoring that Deep South's oldest rivalry. If you're just watching on YouTube, that's fine. But we got a lot more of this came from over at DawgsHQ.com for our premium members. We'll see you there. Peace.